Hey, folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast weekly live stream. Hey, I apologize. I know I said 4 p.m. Eastern time. It's about 4:04. Don't worry. We will go till 5:04 Eastern time. I promise, as we have much to discuss here today on the newscast. Our good friend and our trusty producer, Daniel, is with us as always, and we welcome you to the live stream. Now, a few minutes late because, frankly, I was getting ready for a very important trip. I want to start off this newscast live stream today with two questions. Where on earth do you think I'm going? And you can contribute there and comment in our chats. And number two, and I'm going to pull the chat up real quick as we're talking. And number two, and much more importantly, where do you think this is all heading with Russia? I want to discuss this today. We've been talking about this the past few days on the newscast, is this a head fake by Vladimir Putin, a ruse of sorts? Because he's saying, look, we've withdrawn troops from near the Ukraine border, but NATO, the United States, are saying, no, he's actually added troops near the Ukraine border. And again, Biden said today that an invasion is imminent. What do you think? We've heard so much, obviously, over the past week, especially. Will there be an invasion? I don't think any of us here are military strategists per se, but what do you think? What in observing the situation, what's your take? We have people from all over the world. I see Jerusalem, Denmark, the Netherlands with us right now. I'm just looking at our chat, scrolling down here on my laptop as I talk to you. Will there be an invasion? Because right now, a lot of people have said in our comments this week, and yes, I do read the comments. We don't always get a chance to respond because there's so many of them, and I'm a busy guy, slightly busy guy, but a lot of people said, well, this is a head fake. Not only is he not going to invade, but perhaps Vladimir Putin will turn his attention elsewhere in the world, perhaps even the Middle East. And we talked about that on yesterday's newscast and the day before. You can check it out here in our archives if you missed it. Vladimir Putin making moves, major moves this week in the Middle East as we speak. Hey, if you haven't subscribed, be sure to subscribe as well and click the notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted. I know that almost sounds obligatory on a YouTube video, but really, we want you to join us here as watchmen and women on the wall for such a time as this, because folks, as you're seeing right now, the wars and rumors of wars are intensifying. And I can promise you, number one, we will not mince words here on the newscast. We will not bite our tongues. We will not hold our peace. And number two, we will bring you the kind of breaking, real news updates that you really won't get in many other places here on YouTube or anywhere else, in my humble opinion. This is the mantle that God Almighty has given us, and we're trying to run with it as I plug in my laptop and make sure it does not die on me. Very professional operation here at the Watchman. Just kidding. And there is a poll, by the way. I want to mention that. Daniel just informed me. There is a poll about Russia. Will Russia invade? Okay, we've got a lot to talk about. Let's focus here now. Had a late start. I'm kind of rushing around, getting ready for my trip, but let's focus now for the next hour. Remember to leave your questions for our Q&A session, and let's dig into a few topics. Number one, we'll talk about Russia. We can talk all day long about Russia and Ukraine, and you're hearing endless analysis about that on an endless amount of networks right now. Let's talk about Russia in the Middle East. Let's talk about the potential head fake, as we saw, or is he going to invade? Hey, look, it looks very likely that Russia is going to invade Ukraine. Some kind of, maybe it's a partial invasion of just the eastern half of Ukraine. Maybe they don't go all the way in and take Kiev. We don't know. But all indications seem to be that they will invade, at least according to Western officials and according to Russian troop movements. Some 150,000 Russian troops to the north, south, and east of Ukraine right now. So without a doubt, there is serious movement, and it looks like an invasion. When I say head fake and I say ruse, I'm not being cute or conspiratorial at all. What I'm saying is perhaps Vladimir Putin can get what he wants without invading. Perhaps he can get the kinds of concessions that he's seeking from Ukraine, from NATO, from the West, without firing a single shot. Just the mere presence of those 150,000 Russian troops, the mere menace of Russia on Ukraine's borders could be enough to bring forth the kind of concessions and gains for Russia that he seeks. And what does Vladimir Putin want before we move on? Just a refresher course for you. He wants Ukraine never joining NATO, obviously. He wants no NATO missiles in Ukraine at his doorstep. And he wants all NATO troops out of Eastern Europe, in particular, Romania, Bulgaria. So these are some of the demands. NATO has not agreed to the demands. So we have pretty much a collision course here right now with Ukraine in the middle of it. The big question is, and we talked about this on yesterday's newscast, does this go beyond Ukraine eventually? Does this eventually touch the Baltic states like Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia? What about Poland? So there are serious questions about whether this is going to extend eventually. What are Vladimir Putin's goals, his ambitions? Does he want to revive the glory days of the Soviet Empire? These are the big questions right now, folks, that people are asking, and I definitely want to talk about his moves in the Middle East, and we will. You know, a lot of people over the past few days, I've seen comments, people defending Vladimir Putin, and frankly, some Vladimir Putin fans, people commenting. We could get into this all day long. I would just say you can tell a lot about a person by the company they keep. And Vladimir Putin right now is not only cozying up very closely to China, but secondly, in the Middle East in particular, his close relationship with Iran and Hezbollah says a lot, to say the least. And you could say, well, that's a marriage of convenience. But everywhere I look, Vladimir Putin is aligning himself with anti-Western, anti-freedom forces. And guess what? Anti-Israel forces as well. So I'll leave it there. You can tell me what you want here in the comments, what you think of Vladimir Putin. Needless to say, I'm not a fan and I don't trust the man. So, but you can comment and let me know what you think. But you can tell a lot about a man by the company he keeps. And you can tell a lot these days about the moves they're making in the Middle East. Hold that thought about Russia in the Middle East. We're going to get into that. And of course, Ezekiel 38 and 39, the book of Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39, that war of Gog and Magog. How close are we? Is Vladimir Putin a player in that war? First, we want to talk a little bit about an Israeli airstrike, speaking of Bible prophecy, near Damascus last night. Actually, let me correct myself. Not an airstrike. These were reportedly surface-to-surface missiles fired from the Israeli side of the Golan Heights towards Damascus. Isaiah 17, we talk about Ezekiel 38 and 39, the war of Gog and Magog. Many of our viewers and commenters have said that Isaiah 17, that prophecy may be at the doorstep, which says that Damascus, one of the world's oldest inhabited cities, will become a ruinous heap. It will cease to be a city. According to the book of Isaiah, chapter 17, verse 1, that is in the word of God, folks. It's not me. I'm just quoting what God's word says, and that's exactly what it says. Even the Mongols did not completely destroy Damascus, but the Bible says clearly that a day is coming where Damascus will, again, I quote, cease to be a city. So whenever you have airstrikes around Damascus and activity there, people clearly take notice. Now, let's dig into this. Before I do, we have someone from Ireland joining us right now. As a half Irishman myself, I welcome you, my friend. We have people from all over the world with us. Ontario, Canada in the house. We're praying for you up there with everything you're dealing with under that Trudeau regime. And we have people from across the United States. We have thousands of people with us right now and thousands more to come. South Africa with us. Folks, where else can you find people from around the world, like-minded folks, all together as not only watchmen and women on the wall, but hey, if you're a follower of Jesus like me, with your brothers and sisters in Christ, now more than ever, I believe we need to be shoulder to shoulder and be salt and light in these perilous times in which we live. Yes, perilous times, but also Bible times. And this is where we earn our keep. Not when things are going smoothly and everything's great and there's prosperity and abundance and all that good stuff, but when things really get rough and nasty and precarious, that is when the body of Christ will step up and really be that light in the darkness, be leaders, and earn their keep, earn their eternal rewards in many ways. So these are the days, and we're in them right now. And I say all that to say I'm glad that you're with us. Someone says shalom from Germany. Yes, shalom. More from Canada, Oklahoma, Richmond, Kentucky, Dubai with us. Hello, Dubai. This is great. The Damascus, not an airstrike. Let's just say a strike by Israel overnight. Today is Thursday, February 17th. This actually is my dad's birthday. He passed away in 2003. So thinking about him today on February 17th. But with that airstrike, not an airstrike, surface-to-surface missile strike, Israel likely, and we don't know what the exact targets were, Israel was likely targeting Iranian or Hezbollah weapons shipments. We've seen this many times, folks, over the past few years, hundreds upon hundreds of airstrikes and surface-to-surface missile strikes, of course, against Iranian and Hezbollah targets inside Syria. And there is a Russia angle here. Hold on a minute. But we don't know what the strikes in particular targeted, but we can take a guess, right, that it may have involved those precision-guided missiles, PGMs for short. Now, they do exactly what their name says. They enable a group like Hezbollah to hit their target with great precision, great accuracy. And one of the reasons Iran went all in Syria in helping out Bashar al-Assad and helping him to prevail in that bloody Syrian civil war is that Iran felt it could not afford to lose Syria as a transit point to transit weapons through onto southern Lebanon into the hands of Hezbollah, Iran's most lethal and dangerous proxy at Israel's doorstep. Hey, folks, the wonders, the joys of live TV and live streaming. Do you hear my dog upstairs? His bark is worse than his bite. He's a Morkie. He's a little guy, about 17 pounds, half Maltese, half Yorkshire Terrier. So when we're talking about Iran and Hezbollah barking up the wrong tree, my dog is barking upstairs. Why? Because the kids just got home from school. So, he's going to be a big greeter. Hey, we lay it all on the line here. We got nothing to hide here on the Watchman live stream. I'm just a regular guy coming to you. This is life just like you, just like at your house. Your kids get home from school, the dog's barking, your laptop's not plugged in, you got some lighting issues. Welcome to my world as well. We're all in it together, which is fun. But surface-to-surface missile attack, we don't know if there were any casualties, number one, in this attack. It was south of Damascus, by the way, the Syrian capital. Apparently some pretty large explosions, no doubt. And the response, this is the interesting point where we really want to break down Russia. The response muted by Syria. We've seen many times Syria returning fire using surface-to-air missiles, missile defense systems, to try to shoot down these Israeli fighter jets or Israeli missiles. Surface-to-air missiles supplied by Russia. The S-300 system is one, advanced Russian anti-missile systems. Usually, the Syrian military, which operates these missile defense systems, uses them, and they try to shoot down the incoming Israeli missiles and Israeli fighter jets. That did not happen this time, and it seems like the reason that did not happen is that these were not airstrikes from the sky, from an Israeli fighter jet or from a drone. These were surface-to-surface missiles. And it appears perhaps those Syrian missile defense systems were not ready for that. And you didn't get the usual reaction of them trying in vain to shoot down the Israeli fighter jets or the incoming missiles. Why would Israel use surface-to-surface missiles in this case? So many times it's been airstrikes, right? We've talked about this many, many times. Why surface-to-surface missiles apparently fired from the Golan Heights this time? Now, perhaps it didn't mean anything. Perhaps the Israel Defense Forces said, this is the best way to go about it. Let's use surface-to-surface missiles this time. Could it also be a reluctance on the part of Israel now to use Israeli aircraft, fighter jets, in Syria's skies because of Russia? And here's where we come to Russia in the Middle East. We also have to talk about today Hezbollah, a Hezbollah drone shot down on the Israel-Lebanon border. We have to talk about Hamas today as well, some serious activity there. But the Russia factor in the Middle East, let's kind of regroup here and review what's gone on over the past few weeks, really the past few months. As far back as July 2021, not 2020, a Russian official, military official, said essentially that Russia was losing patience. I'm paraphrasing, but this is the crux of what he said. Russia was losing patience with Israeli airstrikes in Syria. And that was back in July. Number two, the new Israeli Prime Minister, well, relatively new, it's been since June now, but Naftali Bennett, in the wake of Benjamin Netanyahu, the former Israeli prime minister, paying repeated visits to Moscow to meet with Vladimir Putin, the Russian president. Naftali Bennett, in October of 2021, made his first visit to meet with Putin at Putin's Black Sea resort in Sochi. By all accounts, the meeting went very well. And just as it was under the government of Benjamin Netanyahu, the status quo continued in Syria, which is Israel operating freely and carrying out airstrikes against Iran, Hezbollah, and their various jihadi proxies in Syria with no interference from Russia. That was the status quo, so to speak, under Benjamin Netanyahu. It seemed to have continued since June under Naftali Bennett. Although those comments way back in July gave me pause. I said, uh-oh, now the Russians, we've anticipated this, especially the prophecy watchers here like me have anticipated this all along, that eventually Russia would say, game over. And you know what, Israel, we are not going to allow you to operate freely in Syria anymore. Now, I say that, although Israel should not have to answer to Russia or the United States for that matter. Israel is a sovereign nation that can make its own decisions about its defense. All that said, let's be honest, Russia is a massive nuclear superpower, not a superpower economically anymore. Those days are long gone, the Soviet glory days that Putin wants to restore. But in a nuclear sense, certainly still a superpower, still a military powerhouse. Some of their military hardware, of course, is outdated, but still a formidable army. Thousands of Russian troops are in Syria right now at Israel's doorstep. It's an obstacle. It's a serious issue. Israel wants to stay on the right side of Vladimir Putin. Let's be honest. So that gave me pause in July, those statements. Apparently, though, Bennett's visit a few months later straightened things out for the time being. And by all accounts in the Israeli media, it was a great meeting. And Bennett came home and said, okay, you know, we can still continue to strike against Iran in Syria. And Israel has done exactly that over the past few months, including two separate strikes back in January in Latakia, which is the port there, the major port on the Mediterranean in Syria, where I'm sure Iranian shipments had come through the port and Israel targeted them at Latakia. Folks, that was noteworthy because a Russian base is very close to Latakia. So in this case, Israel was literally doing it under the Russians' noses. So we have that. That's some of the backdrop. Let's fast forward now to the past few weeks. We reported here in the newscast about 2 weeks ago, I believe, 2 or 3 weeks ago, that Russian and Syrian fighter jets were patrolling the borders of Syria, conducting flyovers, patrols of Syria's borders, including Syria's border with Israel. I'm talking about the strategic Golan Heights up north, and got to be an uneasy feeling in Jerusalem to see that Russian and Syrian fighter jets side by side flying over the Golan or very close to the Golan on the Syrian side, right across the border from Israel. That also was something that piqued my interest, to say the least, and certainly piqued the interest of the Israel Defense Forces and Israel's leadership. And they were saying, And Russia also, key point, said, we want to make this a regular thing. We want to make these patrols a regular occurrence. That alarmed Israel, to say the least. And they said, well, wait a minute. You're going to be patrolling with a sworn enemy of Israel. The regime of Bashar al-Assad is still technically in a state of war against Israel. Israel and Syria have been in a state of war for decades, even though it hasn't been a shooting war, large scale. There is technically not a state of peace between Israel and Syria. And Bashar al-Assad is a sworn enemy of Israel. And Russia is now conducting patrols with that sworn enemy, a stone's throw from Israel along Israel's borders. Alarming. And then came about a week ago, a Russian foreign ministry spokeswoman. This was on last Friday's newscast. Again, check it out. You can find everything here in our archives on the news channel. Just go to newscast and you'll find it there. Last Friday, actually it was last Thursday night, she made the comments. We reported on it Friday. This Russian foreign ministry spokeswoman blasted Israel. And I won't say she made a demand that Israel stop its airstrikes in Syria, but she was very clear that Russia is not happy about Israeli airstrikes in Syria. She said they need to stop. And not only that, and I quote her directly, she said that Israeli airstrikes in Syria are a crude violation, her words, of Syria's sovereignty. Not only that, she said they make war more likely. So in this Russian foreign ministry spokeswoman's view, war becomes more likely in the Middle East, not because of Iran and Hezbollah and Iran trying to transit advanced precision weapons into the hands of Hezbollah to be used against Israel, which is the size of the state of New Jersey. Just a helpful reminder. No, the real problem in the region is Israel. Israel is the real obstacle for peace. Where have I heard that before? Many, many times at the UN, even in the halls of the White House among certain administrations. I'm talking about President Obama, and I'm sure members of the current administration who haven't gone all in yet on the Israeli-Palestinian issue and pressuring Israel to a Palestinian state, but I'm pretty certain they will. And they've certainly gone all in on that Iran nuclear deal. Bottom line is, Israel's enemies get a free pass, and Israel is the one asked to make all the concessions. It's always been that way. It's frustrating to watch unfold, but we know that God Almighty never slumbers nor sleeps. The God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he has a way of working things out for his people and his land. Nonetheless, as a supporter, a friend of Israel, this is very, very frustrating to watch. Now Russia is pointing the finger at Israel. Yes, these are preemptive strikes in Syria, preemptive to defend the people of Israel, who would be the victims of those Iranian Hezbollah weapons. Not only that, Iran wants to duplicate in Syria what it has accomplished through Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, again at Israel's northern doorstep, and that is a base from which to attack Israel. Folks, there's a reason that Iran has been hell-bent on establishing a presence, a beachhead on the Golan, on the Syrian side of the Golan for years now. It's real simple. They want to set up shop right across from Israel's Golan Heights. And when you have the Golan Heights, you have the high ground, and they want to rain rockets and missiles down on the Galilee and Israeli communities below, just as what happened in former days, before 1967, before Israel regained the Golan Heights, which was Israeli territory 2,000 years ago. And the copious amount of ancient synagogues dating back to those days show that, yes, the people of Israel lived on the Golan Heights over 2,000 years ago. That is a part of the land of Israel, and it is strategic high ground. So Iran certainly has plans there, and that, I would say, 1A and 1B, ladies and gentlemen, for the Israeli airstrikes in Syria. Some people are saying, hey, just as this Russian foreign ministry spokeswoman is saying, hey, Israel, it's your fault. You're the problem here. You are carrying out airstrikes against Syria. I'd say two reasons that's happening. Number one, Israel is carrying out airstrikes against Iran inside Syria, and Iran shouldn't even be there. But number one, they're doing this to push Iran back from Israel's borders from the Golan Heights. And number two, they're doing this to prevent the shipment, again, as I mentioned earlier, of advanced weapons into the hands of Hezbollah. It's real simple. It's common sense. It's a wise move by Israel to defend its borders. And yet the world doesn't want to hear that. You think of the book of Joel, chapter 3, verse 2, where God will have his say in the valley of Jehoshaphat in Jerusalem. Go back and read Joel 3:2. To me, it's one of the foundational verses for what we do here on the Watchman, where God says he will bring all nations down to the valley of Jehoshaphat, and there he will judge the nations on how they treated his people, his inheritance, Israel. That's what Joel 3:2 says. And God says they divided up, they attempted to divide up my land and my city, Jerusalem. Joel 3:2, very important. And I think of that right now when I think of the nations of the world pointing the finger at Israel, blaming Israel. So precarious position. Let's bring it back now to Russia. We have all this activity, these statements, and now all of a sudden we have Israel using surface-to-surface missiles fired from Israeli territory at Iranian targets in Syria. Just interesting. Again, it could be nothing. It could have just been the right move to make militarily and strategically, maybe an element of surprise. Again, I mentioned those Syrian air defense systems supplied by Russia apparently were not activated, or it could have been a case of where Israel is treading lightly now. And Israel could be saying that, you know what, let's kind of cool it with our Israeli Air Force fighter jets going in there and conducting sorties. We don't know how Russia's going to react. We don't want to anger Vladimir Putin and Russia. Perhaps Israel was saying that. There's a good chance of that. We'll see as the days and weeks go on now. Will Israel have a different strategy in Syria in order to kind of keep that distance from Russia and not stir the pot there, so to speak? Folks, I can guarantee you this. Israel is not going to stop striking Iran and Hezbollah in Syria. They're not going to allow it. There is a collision course here. The more Iran tries to entrench itself in that country and get these advanced weapons through Syria into the hands of Hezbollah, the more they drive towards the Golan Heights, the more Israel says, no way, we can't allow this. It's not happening. So no matter what Russia says, ultimately, Israel will find a way to strike against Iran and Hezbollah in Syria. Now, we have to talk about the timing again, and we've got thousands of people with us. This is great from around the world, just people saying shalom. I'm looking at the chat here real quick. Europe, we have Africa, Asia, we have all around the world, of course, here in the United States as well. Exciting to see. And we have from the Middle East, including from the Arab world, which is awesome. We're so glad to have you guys with us. Something I want to throw out there. It's a question. We started with a question. Do you think Vladimir Putin's going to invade? We're going to talk about this in our Q&A session at the end. Last 15 minutes or so, we'll get into Q&A. If you are a premium member, hey, give us a shout out here. And if you're not a premium member, for $4.99 a month, you can become a premium Watchman member. And number one, you will get exclusive first looks at our brand new Watchman TV show episodes, including one today with exclusive commentary from yours truly. And we'll be chatting and doing some really cool stuff we have planned. So that's pretty cool. If you can sign up to be a premium member, we'd love that, to join our growing ranks of watchmen and women on the wall. Check that out under, I think, join and under membership here on the homepage. And you also help us to stay afloat and keep the channel going, which is very nice. So it's great to have you with us here as premium members as well. Welcome to all of our premium members and to everyone who's watching, whether you're a premium member or not. We love you all. We're so appreciative that you're here. I threw out in the beginning the question, will Russia invade? Or is it some kind of head fake where Putin's threatening the invasion, but ultimately at the end of the day, the West and Ukraine make concessions and he gets what he wants without firing a shot? That was the big question that we started off with. And here's another question for you. Two more. This is like a course today, a crash course in the Middle East geopolitics. Is it prophetic? What's happening right now? I probably know the answer to that, what our viewers think, and I'm right with you, but is it prophetic? What do you guys think? Where are we on the prophetic timeline? Third question to think about. You got a lot of homework today here. And I was, by the way, in a former life, a teacher. My degree, secondary education, English, and I did teach. And and I guess in a way, God has me teaching again today, in a way, in what we're doing today, which is kind of fun how he brings it all full circle. But teacher, Mr. Stacks is what they called me. My last name, of course, Stakelbeck. It's a mouthful, Mr. Stacks. So Mr. Stacks today is your teacher and your tutor in the finer arts of wars and rumors of wars and Middle East madness. But we will make it interesting, no doubt. My third question along those lines. Has there ever been a time in the nuclear age, since nuclear weapons came around in the 1940s, has there ever been a time when a nuclear powerhouse, a nuclear armed nation, has been openly aligned with terrorist groups? Russia right now, a nuclear powerhouse, no doubt, is openly aligned with Iran and Hezbollah on the battlefields of Syria. There's an alliance there. That is indisputable. There is an alliance between Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah, at least in Syria. Hezbollah, the world's most dangerous terror organization, in my view. Iran, the world's #1 state sponsor of terrorism, according to the US government, every European governments. Iran and Hezbollah, the Revolutionary Guards Corps of Iran, designated by President Trump as a terrorist organization. Hezbollah, with more American blood on its hands than any other terror organization other than Al-Qaeda. Russia, is aligned with Iran and Hezbollah. And so I ask you, jog your memories. Is there a time when a nuclear power has been openly aligned with designated terror groups? The closest that I come is Pakistan and the Taliban. The Pakistani military and the Pakistani ISI, their intelligence services, have had a very cozy relationship with the Taliban since the mid-90s. But they have at least tried to deny it at times. Russia is openly aligned with Iran and Hezbollah. That Vladimir Putin doesn't seem to care what the world thinks about him. And he doesn't care what you think about his alliances. And he's openly aligned with Islamic terrorists in Syria. That's indisputable. Now, it's interesting because he has fought against ISIS and Al-Qaeda and jihadis of that Sunni ilk, yet he's now aligning himself with the likes of Iran and Hezbollah, which are just a different side of the same jihadi coin. I know the theological differences very well between Sunni and Shia. I'm not going to get into the weeds there. And I know that ISIS and Iran and Hezbollah, the Iran-Hezbollah wing, the Shia wing, and the Sunni wing of jihad don't see eye to eye on many things, and they have different strategic tactics. On a tactical level, they differ, and there's eschatological differences. I get that. But at the end of the day, they essentially do want the same thing. Both sides want world domination. And secondly, they are jihadists. Sunni jihadis on the ISIS Al-Qaeda side and Shia jihadis in Iran and Hezbollah. So while Vladimir Putin is killing jihadis of the Sunni stripe, he's aligning himself with jihadis of the Shia stripe. It seems very short-sighted to me and doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But I said earlier, you can tell a lot about a man by the company he keeps. And that's the company Vladimir Putin keeps. So I ask you, other than that, other than perhaps, Pakistan and the Taliban, that cozy relationship, I don't know that I can think of another nuclear power that has openly aligned itself with terror groups. A provocative question here. Today on the Watchman Newscast live stream, we've got thousands of people with us. This is great. And we've got a lot of people commenting. So I suspect that we will have a lot of questions at the end for our Q&A. Hey, these polls are ongoing thanks to our trusty producer, Daniel. Let's see. Daniel, we got some numbers here, it looks like. Is the current situation with Russia prophetic? 83% say no. Just kidding. 83% say yes, of course it's prophetic. Absolutely. The chess pieces are moving on the board, and we had a bunch of people vote there. So thanks, guys. That's awesome. Keep voting. Is it prophetic? Hey, 17% did say no. I'm talking not only about Ukraine, folks, by the way, what's going on there. I'm talking about what's happening in the Middle East along with Russia. Let's talk about that. We just talked about Russia and Israel. All of a sudden, a tenuous situation, a tenuous relationship, increasingly, in my view, based on comments and actions by Russia. This week, did you hear about this? I know you heard about it here on the Watchman Newscast on Tuesday and yesterday, but did you see any kind of extensive media, mainstream media reporting about this story I'm about to share with you? Please comment and tell me if you did. Russia right now is conducting its largest military drill, naval drill, in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea at Israel's doorstep since the Cold War. Yes, Russia this week. The Russian defense minister on Tuesday was in Syria, meeting with Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad, obviously a close Russian ally. And Sergei Shoigu, the Russian defense minister, was there to inform Assad that Russia would be kicking off this massive naval drill in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea, not far from the coast of Syria and the coast of Lebanon and Israel. Now, this massive naval drill Russia is conducting involves some 30 Russian fighter aircraft, including nuclear-capable bombers and Russian fighter jets armed with hypersonic cruise missiles, and also some 15 Russian destroyers, all in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea, conducting, again, the largest naval drill there in decades. For the 17% who said there's nothing prophetic going on right now, man, I beg to differ. That is an interesting development, to say the least. So while Russia is, you would think, preoccupied by what's going on in its own backyard in Eastern Europe vis-a-vis Ukraine, it's still finding the time for a massive naval drill in the shadow of the Middle East, while those thousands of Russian troops remain planted in Syria at Israel's doorstep, and while Russia is seemingly becoming increasingly agitated with Israel operating to defend itself against Iran inside Syria. This naval drill is something we're watching closely, and you could say, okay, it's a message to the world, but and it is a message to the world by Vladimir Putin, but clearly Putin, as we said at the top, wants to revive the glory days. He had said about 10 years ago, I believe he said this, that the collapse of the Soviet Union was one of the greatest calamities of the 20th century. That's Vladimir Putin, former KGB man, of course. So he pines for those good old days, in his view, of the Soviet Empire. Take it back even further to the czars and their imperialist ambitions and how they expanded their territory. He sees Russia as a great power. He made comments to that extent once again this week. And interesting, yesterday, I interviewed for a special we did last night on TBN called Ukraine Crisis. If you missed it, check it out. You can go to TBN on demand. Actually, it may be on the Watchman channel. I'm not sure as well. But a great special. We did 90 minutes on the Russia-Ukraine crisis. And for this special, I interviewed a guy by the name of Pavel Pavlichenko, who was the interpreter for Mikhail Gorbachev, the last leader of the Soviet Union. And he joined me from Moscow, and he had some very interesting insights. But I bring that up to tell you that he is certainly a Russian nationalist, and he made abundantly clear to me in our interview, because I said, hey, Putin wants to become a superpower once again. He said, hey, wait a minute, we're still a superpower. We're a nuclear superpower because of our massive nuclear arsenal. We are a superpower still, even though economically the West has passed us by and things like that, culturally, etc. But due to our nuclear arsenal, we are a superpower. And Vladimir Putin has made comments similar to that in recent weeks. It gives you an idea where they are coming from. And you may see Russia in a certain way, and the geniuses, so-called, inside the Washington Beltway may see Russia in a certain way, but Russia doesn't see themselves in that way. Barack Obama once called Russia, if I'm not mistaken, a regional power. It's not how Vladimir Putin sees Russia. He sees Russia as a global power. That's why Eastern Europe is on notice, and that's why the Middle East, the world's most pivotal, strategic, chaotic region, is also on notice when it comes to Russia. One last note before we move on to Hezbollah and Hamas. And oh my gosh, we have comments or questions coming very soon. By the way, the live stream goes for a full hour. If you watch the newscast on a daily basis, it's usually between 9 and 13 minutes of very focused, hard news. We get in and we get out. I have fun with the live streams. Yeah, we might ramble a little bit and talk about other things and personal stuff, because the live stream is an opportunity for me to get to know you better and you to get to know me a little bit better, which I think is fun. Hey, there's not the interaction on the daily newscast that we have on the live stream. So forgive me and excuse me if from time to time we kind of go off in little detours, but hopefully it's always keeping your interest and always interesting. Hey, we got to fill a whole hour, right, with content. So I can't beat you over the head with doom and gloom for an hour. Let's talk about some good things too, some other interesting things as well. So I hope you enjoy that about the live stream, how it's noticeably looser, I think, with dogs barking and kids coming in from school and throwing their school bags down. It's a little bit looser, a little more personal. You get to know me a little bit better. I'm just a dude. I'm a regular guy from Philly, and you get to know me a little bit better. I think that's fun, and I love that about the live stream. So we have about a few minutes left, about 20 minutes left, and we need to get to questions in 1 minute. So, closing thought on Russia and the Middle East. Observing the events of the past week with Ukraine, what have Western leaders done? They've pitched a fit, as they would say, and they have stirred up a lot of dust and complained, and they have threatened diplomatic action and sanctions. But Vladimir Putin has just laughed it off, essentially. He doesn't care. The book of Ezekiel, there's that book again, chapters 38 and 39, says that when this last day's confederation comes against Israel, and by the way, perishes on the mountains of Israel, when God Almighty directly intervenes, you don't have to worry about the Gog and Magog invasion. God himself directly intervenes and shows his face to the world in a way he hasn't in some 2,000 years. So don't be worried. Okay, fear not about this coming invasion. And the Bible is clear it is going to come. That's not just me making that up out of thin air. I'm telling you what the Bible says. And it says the invasion will come. And when it does come, that the merchants of Tarshish and Sheba and Dedan, a lot of people think this refers to the West, to the United States, the young lions, the United States, the UK, perhaps Saudi Arabia. They protest. And they say, why are you doing this when this confederation moves against Israel in the latter days? And many believe Russia will lead that confederation, along with Iran and Turkey and other nations. The world, quote unquote, I'm sure the UN and in Brussels, the EU, they say, why are you doing this? But the Bible is very clear. These loud voices who are wringing their hands over it, they don't intervene. They do not lift a finger to help Israel, but God does. But we see the dry run of sorts right now, could we say? I mean, Putin's on the march, obviously, menacing Ukraine, and there's been a lot of threats by Joe Biden of economic sanctions, and we're not going to stand for this. But according to the White House, Putin is actually adding more troops to the Ukraine border. So when there is those armies massed on Israel's borders one day to the north, according to the book of Ezekiel, chapter 38 and 39, what's the world going to say? Does anyone see a Winston Churchill out there right now, a Churchillian figure in the West, at least in the halls of power right now? Maybe there's some, hopefully, that God is raising up for such a time as this. I firmly hope that. But I don't see any of them in the capitals of NATO, the EU, or the United States, in terms of being actually in office as a national or world leader right now. And I bring that up because you could completely 100% see the scenario that Ezekiel lays out. Why are you doing this? Have you come to take great spoil? Ezekiel says, they ask, but they don't do anything. They don't intervene. All looks lost. But then God Almighty has a little something to say about that. If you have never read the book of Ezekiel, chapter 30, the entire book of Ezekiel, but in particular chapters 38 and 39, you think I sound like a nut job? Go and check it out. I strongly encourage you. It's enlightening. I'll say that. And it, I think, holds a lot of clues to what we are going to see in the days to come. Okay, we got to get to questions. Quick mention, Hezbollah, Hamas. Hezbollah drone shot down today along the Israel-Lebanon border. Kind of a big deal, in my opinion, not just a little drone errantly being shot down. Is Hezbollah trying to conduct surveillance, probing? Was this probably an Iranian-supplied drone? We know that Iran is equipping its proxies throughout the region: Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, the entire roll call of Iranian proxies, and the ring of fire that surrounds Israel. Drone shot down today above Israel's border with Lebanon. Drone shot down also near Israel's border with Gaza, a Hamas drone on the same day. And yesterday, U.S. forces shot down 2 drones over Iraq, Iranian-supplied drones. Do you see a pattern here? Do you think the Iranian regime and its proxies are testing the waters and probing folks? Because I do, and I believe they've been doing it more and more as they've seen weakness in the West. There it is again. And they saw the Afghanistan effect take hold back in August, and they saw weakness in Washington, D.C., and they see Vladimir Putin on the move and really not suffering any consequences as of yet. They see China making constant threats against Taiwan and testing hypersonic missiles. They see Kim Jong-un firing off missiles of his own. And they don't see much of a response, a concerted, coordinated response from the West. You could say that NATO has had a coordinated response with Russia. Coordinated, in my view, in its weakness in many ways. And the likes of Iran and its proxies see that. They don't see much stomach for a fight in the West, and they're going to push. They see this as a window of opportunity where you have weakness in the high offices of the West and no one to stand in their way in their view. They're going to push and they're going to probe, and Israel's going to defend itself. And they also look at the Israeli government. They say Naftali Bennett, relatively new prime minister, an Israeli government with many different ideological bents in it as well. It's a coalition government. A lot of factors at play here where they're trying to test and trying to probe. Prophetic days, without a doubt. Let's get to some questions. Daniel, did you send any along, my friend? Where should I look, please? Check in the live stream area. Okay, let's see here, guys. Give me 1 second. Pardon me, my faithful viewers, as I look for your great questions. Gotcha. No problem. No problem. Keep the questions coming. That's an order from Mr. Stacks, your teacher for the day. Linda Diaz, who is a premium member. Linda, thank you so much. Are we living in the time of Jacob's trouble that the Bible talks about, the time of Jacob's trouble, of Israel's trouble? Linda, I believe we are getting close. I think a variety of factors are combining to make this almost the days of Jacob's trouble. I don't think we're there yet, but that day will come. I think, number one, Israel obviously surrounded on all sides by Iran, by various enemies. I think number two, obviously Russia and the Gog-Magog war looming to the north. I think number three, totalitarianism and authoritarianism rising around the world, including right here in the West, by the way. I think number four, weakness in Washington, D.C., in the United States. On one hand, Israel, it's interesting because on one hand, Israel has never had more friends than it does now since it was miraculously reborn in 1948. Hey, the Abraham Accords, even Sunni Arab nations are coming alongside Israel, both publicly, Bahrain, the UAE, Morocco, and behind the scenes, Saudi Arabia, Oman, and others. They're aligning themselves with Israel. Israel also has a great relationship with India and some Eastern European nations and South American nations. So more and more, we're seeing Israel more embraced than ever before. But on the flip side of that, the anti-Israel bloc is becoming more and more vocal and aggressive and more united. I said about Putin, you can tell a lot about a man by the company he keeps. China, North Korea, Iran, Turkey, Hamas members and leaders have visited Moscow. He's aligned with Hezbollah as well in Syria, Bashar al-Assad. It's an anti-Western alliance that is forming. And look, these folks group Israel in with the West. So the time of Jacob's trouble, it depends on where you think we are on the prophetic timeline. I believe we are moving rapidly on the prophetic timeline. I've said 2022 is a year of acceleration. Things are certainly accelerating, but the time of Jacob's trouble, I'm sad to say, will come. And I don't know that we're very far off. I will say I'm not in the business of predictions or anything like that. Because I don't know. Jesus said only the Father knows. And I'm not going to do that, but I can tell you the Olivet Discourse that Jesus laid out in Matthew 24, when Jesus says the signs of the times, and he lays them out. I encourage you to go back and look at Matthew 24. Jesus lays out the signs of the times. Unless I'm totally off base, man, I think I'm seeing a lot of those signs right now. Linda, good question. Thanks for being a premium member. What else do we have here? Let's see, we have a few. Benedicta Nazareth is a good old troll joining us who's incorrect. Sorry, in the chat. You got to call the trolls out sometimes. Let's see what else we have here. That's okay. This is an interesting one. When's the last time we've talked about Egypt? Someone has a question here about Egypt. Christopher Felker, thanks for the question. How has this changed Egypt's I don't quite understand the question. He's talking about Egypt and the Abraham Accords. Egypt has had a peace treaty with Israel since 1979. So the Abraham Accords, they've only strengthened the relationship between Egypt and Israel, I would say, because Egypt says, wow, now we're not the only ones. It was just Jordan, which struck a deal with Israel back in 94 and Egypt in the late 70s. And now other nations are coming on board. So Egypt feels a little more comfortable and says, okay, we're not the only ones. Egypt, remember, folks, I saw the word Egypt and it caught my attention because, man, a few years ago, I was talking about Egypt all the time. It's a Bible land with a prophetic role to play. Hey, I look at Isaiah 19. You want encouragement? Isaiah 19 talks about a day when there will be a highway running from Assyria through Israel onto Egypt, and they will all be united together. That's pretty amazing. So Egypt is a Bible land then. It will be a Bible land in the future. But I was talking about Egypt a lot, the Muslim Brotherhood, the instability there. I wrote a whole book about it called The Brotherhood. You can still find that on Amazon.com if you're interested. All my books are there. Remember, Egypt is the most populous and most influential Arab nation. A lot of people say, however Egypt goes, so goes the Middle East. So keep a close eye. President Sisi is a strong friend of Israel and an opponent of terror and jihad. So he's done a good job there. But Egypt is a pivotal player, again, at Israel's southern doorstep. So we watch, hey, you had two massive revolutions in Egypt in the span of about 3 years. First, you had the so-called Arab Spring, which quickly devolved into an Islamist winter. And then shortly, the Muslim Brotherhood took power, and then Sisi and the military took over and overthrew that revolution. So to have two revolutions in the same pivotal, influential country in the span of 2 or 3 years is a pretty big deal. Now that the dust has settled over the past 9 years or so, but always watching Egypt and praying for stability there. And for the Egyptian president Sisi, who again has been very strong with Israel and wants to be an ally of the West. Watching that closely, I think of a guy like Anwar Sadat, who made peace with Israel. It ultimately costed him his life. He was assassinated by Islamic terrorists in, I believe it was 1981 when Sadat was killed. So always watching. When an Arab leader steps forward and makes a bold move for peace, you're just always concerned about his safety. And right now we see the uptick in attacks by Iran against the United Arab Emirates, which is a Abraham Accords member nation. So it's a sad fact. What else do we have? Questions here, questions. Come on, let's do it. What do we have here? I'm enjoying this, folks. I hope you're enjoying it. I'm not, can't say I'm enjoying talking about wars and rumors of wars. I wish we didn't have to. I wish we could talk about something lighthearted. But I enjoy being with you, and I enjoy being with like-minded folks. who get it. You know, if you're on the live stream, you're kind of the special forces of the Watchman News channel, I guess you would say. You really get it, and you're joining us here for the hour, and you want to chat, you want to talk about it, you want to stir things up a little bit. And what do we have here? What do we have here? Let's see, guys. Let's see. The highway, okay. Let's see. Here's a question from Ward Garrison. Ward, thanks for the question. And a lot of people might be wondering about this. Is this going to go nuclear? It sounds insane. I know what's happening with Russia and Ukraine right now. But Ward Garrison asks, I think, a pertinent question. Could this go nuclear? I don't think so. But I do know that Russia is a nuclear powerhouse. I do know that NATO member nations like the United States, Britain, and France have nuclear arsenals. The United States arsenal is quite large. And now we have thousands of U.S. troops moving into Eastern Europe, not into Ukraine, into the eye of the storm, so to speak, but certainly in Poland and NATO troops in Bulgaria, Romania. So it is a very delicate, to put it kindly, situation right now, and a precarious situation. I don't know that it would go to the nuclear. I don't think it would go to the nuclear level in today's world. Expect the unexpected. Never say never, I guess, with this topsy-turvy world we're living in today. I don't think it would go nuclear because my sense, Ward, is that NATO is not going to directly challenge Russia. I would be shocked by that. I think Vladimir Putin, at the end of the day, is probably going to get what he wants here. Or at least some of what he wants, whether he does that through military means with an invasion or extracting concessions from the West and from Ukraine. I think he will come out of this feeling strong and getting what he wants. And that will make him desire even more than what he already has. Maybe he looks to the Baltic states, and maybe he looks south to the Middle East. And remember, Israel has those large natural gas reserves. Another attractive, I'm sure, factor here for any nation that is looking to the Middle East. So, but good question. I don't think this goes nuclear, this particular Russia-Ukraine crisis. I pray that it doesn't, of course, but certainly a tinderbox right now for sure. Let's see. What do we have? We have time for about 2 more questions. Don't leave yet, all you thousands who are with us. We still got some time. Let's see. Let's wrap up with some good ones. What do we have here? Someone asked, where am I going? Because at the top, I left a few questions for you. And one of the issues is that I'm leaving tomorrow on a trip. I'll be gone for a few days. Let's just say, I'll give you a few hints. I'm not going to be in the United States. And it is a place, I don't want to give away too much because I want to kind of pop up and all of a sudden you'll just see me there on the next newscast on maybe Sunday or Monday. We'll have one tomorrow too from the States, but it's a place that is near and dear to the hearts of Watchmen viewers. I'll just say that. I know that's kind of lame, but I'll just say that. I don't want to give too much away. A place that is very near and dear to your heart if you are a loyal Watchmen viewer. And I think, to say the least, you're going to like to see me in this place doing what I'm going to do. Let's see. Where do we have here? One last question here. One last question. What do we have? Come on. You know what? Here's one. A comment by Brian Williams. And Brian, thank you for the comment. He says Russia is not the bad guy here. I've heard this from a lot of people who are pro-Putin in the comments. I have a different take. But he says Russia is not the bad guy here. It's all false flags, basically. I'm not quoting him. I'm paraphrasing what he said. But not just him, but various people have said these are false flag attacks. It's not Russia. And folks, I'm sorry. I see 150,000 Russian troops on the border of a sovereign nation, Ukraine. You do the math. So I think that Vladimir Putin is the aggressor here. We could talk all day about NATO. Is it wise to try and bring Ukraine into the NATO fold and almost, many believe, antagonize Russia? We could talk about that, but in this situation, there's one nation putting troops on the border of another nation. So an interesting point, and I know a lot of people have talked about this, and someone says here, Russia biblically is not the good guy, someone commented here. And I tend to have that opinion as well. You can tell, I'll close again with that thought we started with. You can tell a lot about a man, Vladimir Putin, by the company he keeps, and the company ain't good. Hey, thanks so much for joining us here today on the live stream. Until tomorrow's newscast, God bless you. Hang in there, stay in prayer, and remember, never hold your peace. Take care. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. If you enjoyed this episode and want to see more, make sure you go ahead and hit the like button, click subscribe, and tap the bell icon to turn on notifications for new Watchman Newscast episodes every weekday.